Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and this is my review of the first episode of Season 4 of Star Trek Lower Decks called Tuvix. And this whole episode was basically all references about Voyager, and so I think fans of Voyager especially will like it. And I think this whole show is kind of for hardcore Trekkies because most of the jokes, most of the parodies are based on you knowing all these references. If you have watched the previous shows, if you didn't or don't remember it that well, then maybe you wouldn't find it as funny. So for me personally, it is extremely funny and entertaining to see them play around with all these references. So I personally enjoy it. I know some people don't like the show, but I personally do. And so this episode was all about Voyager. And the only missed opportunity I think was that there was no reference of all that future tech which the alternate Janeway brought back, like that special armor and those torpedoes that can destroy Borg cubes. All of that stuff was never mentioned. I think the only clue was when the captain was looking over some log and parts of it were blacked out, classified. So I guess all that future tech got taken out and locked away somewhere by temporal investigations or something, and that's why it's missing from the ship. And I also found it hilarious how much stuff from old episodes of Voyager was actually left on the ship and they didn't clean it out properly. Like behind panels, you can find all those macro viruses from an episode, and there's some Borg nanoprobes left over in that part of the ship where Seven was regenerating. And so there's a lot of stuff from all kinds of episodes just popping out from behind panels and stuff. I personally found it hilarious. And it's still respectful to the original, like they're making fun of it, but in a loving way, not in an insulting way. And I just love the attention to detail. Even when the ship is at warp, you can see the nacelles move into position, all of that, just like in the original show. And even the stars zipping by, they look like in the original show, not like the new hyperspace look in the new Star Trek shows. And so I love how respectful they are to the original, while also poking fun at all those silly stuff from the old episodes, but in a loving way. So basically, Voyager is now a museum ship. It's been prepared for that, and they're about to take it to Earth, which I think is kind of an inconsistency with Star Trek Picard because we saw Voyager in that space station museum, and I guess there are like 20 years in between, so maybe at some point they simply decided to move it with the other museum ships into space for some reason. But I wish it would have tied better with that right away. Like, what's the point putting it on Earth and not with the other museum ships? I did like how the Golden Gate Bridge, we only see it from below, so we do not see the solar panels, which always annoyed me. So, recently I feel as if someone has been watching my reviews and my complaints and took notes because they seem to be avoiding the things that used to annoy me. And also in this episode, a few characters get promoted to junior lieutenants. So I guess they're still lower decks, but they're now getting their own quarters and not having to sleep together in those bunk beds in the corridor. So I guess we can say they're still lower decks, but not as low as before. So I guess it's a good thing to shake things up and not to keep everything exactly the same. We do still see Boimler going to clean the holodeck, which is a joke that I did kind of like in the beginning, but I think it could have been funnier if they actually show that these ensigns have to kind of clean the floor directly because all the gooey stuff that is left on the floor of the holodeck after someone has used it. So instead they always replace some kind of green gas container in the wall. So I think this joke would have been funnier if it was kind of more gross, more nasty kind of a joke. And it also doesn't really make sense because why would you need to manually do it? Like, why can't the ship do it itself through some tube or something? If it's already stored in the wall, why do you have to manually take it and it's heavy and all of that? Why not create a holodeck character in the holodeck to do it, since it's all in the holodeck anyway? So this is a joke that I kind of like, but I think it would have been done better and more funny. Like, you need to show someone actually going in to wipe the floor of the holodeck. Maybe it has to be done when the holodeck is not in use in order to be able to scrape off all the gooey stuff from the walls and the floor. And so I think it should have been funnier. So anyway, they go to some space station which has the Voyager, and they simply have to escort it to Earth to be a museum ship. And then we go to credits, and the only real difference in this sequence is the part with the Borg cubes, which with each season they're adding something else. So every time it's more aliens fighting the Borg. At first it was only Romulans, I think, and always the Cerritos is escaping and running away. And every season they add something else. So now we see the whale probe, we see some brain ships, we see the crystalline entity, which I think was there in the previous season as well. But especially the whale probe, I think, is the most fun stuff. And I wish the show would actually do something with these ideas. Instead of only referencing them, why not make an actual story? Why not make an actual sequel to some of that stuff? That could be a lot of fun, and yet it's always just jokes and references and parodies of the old stuff. So I do still wish the show would at least occasionally do an actual new story and maybe like a sequel. I guess I can look at this episode as kind of a sequel to Voyager because it's kind of showing us the aftermath, but we didn't actually see any cameos by any of the actual Voyager crew. Like, why not show the EMH at least, activate a new medical hologram in sickbay? You can say it's a new one, not the exact same one who became sentient, but at least have one character from Voyager actually make a cameo. Would have improved the episode a lot. Why not contact Admiral Janeway by subspace and ask her how to deal with the new Tuvix in this episode and all of that? That would have been funnier. So as much as I did love the episode, I do think it could have been better if it included some actual cameos by the actual Voyager crew. That would be more fun. So anyway, we see a lot of references to Voyager. We see them putting a model of Neelix in the kitchen and someone is smelling his food and finds it disgusting. And we see a mannequin of 7 of 9 and Mike McMahon's name appears on top of her. And maybe it's just a coincidence, but I notice often in the show how names of people appear in the exact moments to make it kind of funnier. So maybe Mike McMahon always fantasizing about being on top of 7 of 9 and that's why his name appears in this exact moment to be on top of her. But probably a coincidence. And Rappaport is examining those gel packs on Voyager and he's all excited about them. And he tells about the time when Neelix's cheese infected the gel packs and it caused malfunctions on the ship. And so a lot of references like that. And we see that flower which caused the transporter malfunction that created Tuvix. And we see a piece of it flying off and gets into the transporter room. And at the exact moment when that engineer and the doctor are beaming somewhere, and then they get merged and become a hybrid creature. And so they're now faced with that exact moral dilemma as Janeway. And so the captain says, I'll just read the Janeway's logs and I will just do exactly the same thing she did. And then she discovers she just murdered Tuvix with no hesitation and he was begging for his life and she still did it. So they did poke fun at it, but they did it in an interesting way that even makes the original episode better. Whenever I watch the original episode now, it will be funnier to me, it will be more interesting to me after this one. And that's what a good sequel should do. They kind of elaborated on this idea and played around with it more, making it better in the end. So anyway, they also find one of those macro viruses hiding behind the panel, and then it gets loose on the ship again. And we see all these exhibits on the ship, and the funniest one is probably those salamandras from the worst episode of Voyager, that Threshold episode in which Janeway and Tom Paris turned into those creatures and then had babies, and then they left those babies on some planet, and it was never addressed since. And this show has been poking fun of that numerous times. It's not the first time we see them making fun of it, and now seeing an actual exhibit of it on the ship is extremely hilarious to me. Like, why would they be proud of that event to display it openly? So that's kind of hilarious. And it's also something that is taking the most terrible episode ever and making it more entertaining in retrospect. So they're making something good out of that terrible episode, and so it makes it more worthwhile not to skip that episode if you ever rewatch Voyager. And then the macrovirus also accidentally activates a few hologram programs. And then we see the evil Chaotica from the Captain Proton program, which Tom Paris created. And we see that guy that Janeway fell in love with in one holodeck episode. And we see that clown, which was not even from a holodeck episode, so I'm not sure what he's doing there, but at least they acknowledge it in the dialogue in this episode. They do say, wait, what is he doing in the holodeck when he wasn't even a holodeck program originally? So they never answer it, but at least they address this question in the episode itself. So anyway, the new Tuvix guy is reading up on what happened with Tuvix, and so he also doesn't want to die, so he creates an elaborate plan to avoid it by turning all the other crew members into hybrids as well. So he merges the captain with someone else in the crew so that the captain will be in the same situation. And then they start kidnapping other members of the crew and merging them all together into new hybrids so that everyone will be a hybrid and then they will not be killing them. And the macrovirus gets infected by some Borg nanoprobes, and so it becomes an assimilated virus. And then we see one of those salamandra things also being assimilated, becoming like a Borg drone. and Shax has been merged with someone and is now a woman, I guess. And they're now going around the ship, taking everyone and turning everyone into hybrids. And in the end, all those hybrids accidentally get merged into one giant organism, all mashed up together, and so now suddenly no one has a moral problem of dividing them back into the individuals, because it's now just a giant monster made up of multiple people, so now no one is arguing for moral problems with it. And so in a way, I think this episode actually kind of justifies Janeway's decision of reversing that malfunction, because in this episode they take it to more extremes and showing us how keeping these freaks around is not a good idea. So in some ways it actually makes the original Voyager episode much better, and so that's why I really like this one. And also Rappaport was able to disable the ship before those evil holograms wanted to take it to some Borg cube or something, and so Rappaport used Neelix's cheese to sabotage the ship like in that silly episode. And so all these references I think were brilliant, very funny if you do recognize them. Like if you watched Voyager and you remember some of that stuff, then you will find it funny. If not, it probably won't be as funny if you don't immediately recognize all these references. And the way they play around with it, it's not like something in the background in this episode, it's something directly in the plot. And so I do think you have to know all of that previous stuff even to get what is happening. And so I would not recommend this show to someone who is not already a fan of the old Star Trek shows, because you simply wouldn't get most of these jokes. So anyway, in the end we see Voyager arrived on Earth and is now a museum ship, and as I mentioned, I do wish they would have tied it with Star Trek Picard, in which they showed us that Voyager is a museum ship in space, but there's a few years in between, so I guess at some point they simply moved it into space. And the episode ends on a kind of dark cliffhanger when they show us a Klingon ship and we see the lower decks crew of that ship, and then we see that they encounter some kind of strange looking small ship, which then attacks them and completely destroys and vaporizes the Klingon ship easily. So it kind of reminds me of the beginning of the motion picture, when some Klingon ships encounter a Voyager, which easily destroyed them. So I guess they're setting up some kind of new villain. And by the looks of that small ship, it kind of reminds me of that future shuttle that we saw in the TNG episode A Matter of Time, in which we saw that professor who claimed to be from the future. In the end it turned out he's actually from the past, but that ship was actually from the future and had advanced technology and all of that. So anyway, something about the look of this small ship reminds me of that, so my hunch is that it's something from the future. And you know, that's something that can be really fun to play with. Why not finally reveal to us who was Future Guy? Why not do something fun with that? They can even have voice cameos by some of the guys from Enterprise. And you know, they say one of the ideas in Enterprise was that Future Guy will turn out to be Future Archer, who turned evil at some point in the future, which I'm not sure is the best idea ever, but it could be fun to play with. And you know, I don't even care who it turns out to be, at least we get something with it to get some kind of conclusion to Enterprise and that whole temporal war stuff. And I think Lower Decks will be the perfect show to play around with that, because it's a comedy show, they can get away with doing a lot of silly stuff, and that whole time travel war stuff would be very hard to do in a realistic way anyway, so maybe it is best to use it for some kind of comedy episode, and so that's something I would like to see. So if they later reveal this new villain ship is from the future, maybe it's something to do with Future Guy, maybe we'll get a voice cameo by an evil Scott Bakula doing an evil Captain Archer from some alternate future, which in the end they can erase or something. So you know, it doesn't have to be canon even, because with temporal stuff they can always say it's some different reality, some different timeline, which doesn't have to be the main one, and so on. So they can play around with these ideas in a fun way, and this show will be the perfect setting for it in my opinion. And also in the show they can replicate any set from any ship easily and cheaply, they don't have to actually build the actual set, and so that's why they did the Voyager in this episode. They didn't have to actually build the sets, and they could still show us any part of Voyager they wanted, and so that's why I think this show will be perfect for some kind of convoluted time travel story, in which they can show us different time periods with no budget restraints, and so I do hope they do something like that. Let me know what you think, and we can discuss all of that in the comments below, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.